Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with Shola Mos-Shogbamimu, author and activist, and Benedict Spence, political commentator. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, The Observer leads with a plea from the Archbishop of Canterbury to both the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Labour's Keir Starmer to get rid of the two-child cap on benefit payments. The Telegraph reports on NHS staff being told that they'd have to work evenings and weekends under Labour plans to shorten waiting lists. The Sunday Express carries an exclusive interview with the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, who has taken aim at company bosses for what she describes as too great a focus on activism and political causes. The Sunday Times reports on Chancellor Jeremy Hunt saying he'll honour his promise in seeking justice for victims of the Contaminated blood scandal. The Mail claims plans for a parachute drop over Normandy for the 80th anniversary of D-Day have been scaled back because cutbacks have left the Ministry of Defence without enough planes. TV star Tina Malone has told The Mirror her army veteran husband took his own life and she's setting up a charity to help those returning from war zones. And The People reports that calls for help by stalking victims skyrocketed by 27% across the UK in recent weeks since the hit Netflix drama Baby Reindeer aired. And The Star has a warning for England's Euro hopefuls that they could be kept awake by rowdy German frogs during this summer's competition. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us talk about them. And as I mentioned, we are joined tonight by Shola Mos-Shogbamimu and Benedict Spence, author and activist and political commentator both. Thank you both for joining us. OK, let's take a look at one story that is kind of dominating the Sunday papers, and that is, of course, the tainted blood scandal, because the report is finally published on Monday. Let's take a look at the front page of the Sunday Times. Tainted blood is the worst scandal of my lifetime. It's time for justice, vows Hunt. I mean, we've seen a lot of reports on it. It's heartbreaking. Shola, what do you make of it?
I think it's an utter disgrace it's taken this long. I think that government after government have let down this family. As we understand it, the inquiry is coming to an end tomorrow, and the government is finally looking to put together a compensation of at least £10 billion. But the fact that it coincides with an election cycle kind of makes me cynical, because I'm thinking all this could have been dealt with, handled, like, at least decades ago. Here, Hunt is talking about keeping the vow he made to a dying victim in his constituency a decade ago. And, the Conservatives have been in power for, 13 years? I'm just saying that there's a whole lot more that we need to do to support the loved ones, but also to make sure it never happens again. And I wonder whether or not those who made the decisions that affected a lot of these victims, whether anybody saw time in jail. I think it's really important that it's not enough for us to just say this was bad, I'm sorry. I understand that Rishi Sunak is meant to be given an apology. But people should be paying the price. Not just institutions. People should be paying the price for making these kind of decisions that have led to loss of lives.
Well, in a lot of the interviews, with relatives of those affected, they say they want justice, vindication, recognition of the pain they've gone through. Benedict, we'll take a little look at the compensation issue slightly separately. But, I mean, what do you make of I guess, the scandal that we're finally going to get a report on Monday about?
Well, Sir Brian Langstaff's report will come out tomorrow, and it is, as Shola says, it's something that's been going on for a very long time, far too long. Repeated governments we've had since this started actually happening. I think we've had Labour, we've had Conservative, we've had Labour again, we've had Coalition, and now we've had Conservative for a very long time. So it is an endless cycle of politicians not quite getting to grips with this. it can, I suppose, come under the umbrella of many failures of various aspects of British institutions, the NHS being one. Again, there's a story later that we'll come on to with that. But earlier on this year, we were discussing issues around Royal Mail, the post workers scandal. When David Cameron first became Prime Minister, they reopened an inquiry into the Hillsborough scandal because, of course, there was a cover-up there. It's just sort of this ongoing culture across British society. And actually, it's in the private sector as well as in the public sector. And it seems, given the many sort of iterations of government we've had, it seems almost to be apolitical, that actually what people seem to care most about is not correcting the scandals, it's not making things better, it's covering their own backs and pushing things down the line as long as they possibly can. And as you say, we're going to get to the compensation issue slightly separately, but it's a huge sum, and perhaps it wouldn't have been quite so huge if this had been addressed a lot earlier. And so now successive governments, as they say, they pay the price for the failures of their forebears. But again, who actually is going to be made to pay for this? The taxpayer.
So speaking of compensation, that's actually the line in The Observer. So if we can just pull up that front page. Hunt told to honour the pledge on infected blood payments. Now, what it says here that actually when Jeremy Hunt was chair of the All-Party Health Select Committee just in 2022, so not a million years ago, he said that the payment of £10 billion should be made immediately because, of course, people are dying, every day matters. But now that he's Chancellor, the dynamic may have changed. Shola.
Why should it have changed? We're either putting lives, humanity over money, or we're not. And this, again, this government just continually demonstrates that they do not have the right priorities at heart. And I think this is why people say politics is a whole different kind of demon. That the moment you get into a political office, apparently all of the, the goodness and humanity and focus you had before you go into political office goes out of the window. The reality here is that Hunt should have carried this out as much as possible, not just him, but the entire government he partly represented, and the Conservative government that's been in power for 13 years. It is not good enough. And I'm going to say this again. As far as I'm concerned, it is not enough to just hold institutions to account, to say, OK, let's put in reforms, let's change this. People that made these decisions should be made to pay the price, because that might go a long way to decision makers actually factoring in what would be what would be a cost here.
I guess we'll see what's in the report. But Benedict, your point specifically on compensation.
Well, it's going to start at 10 billion. That's actually what I'd say, is that is the baseline. It could actually be significantly higher. And I can understand why there is perhaps some hesitancy among the bean counters in the Treasury over this, in number 11, because they are trying to offer, tax cuts to people ahead of the next general election because they want to say to people, well, we'll spend this on X, Y, Z and the other. But, 10 billion is not a small drop in the ocean. It's a huge amount of money. And another one of the main themes that we've had over the last 14 years is stagnant growth in this country. If you don't have any growth and you're not actually growing the tax base that you can pull from, well, it becomes very difficult to find 10 billion for a compensation scheme, because it means something else, be it, nurses, be it the armed forces, be it doctor strikes. That means those people don't get paid. So and as I say, it's a tricky thing. It means that governments down the line end up paying a lot more for the sins of previous ones, and it's the taxpayer that ultimately foots the bill.
Let's leave it there because, of course, it's a story that is going to roll on and we'll talk about later as well. Let's go to The Observer, again, front page there. Archbishop of Canterbury urges Starmer to ditch cruel two-child benefit cap, which the Archbishop Welby basically called... what's the word? Even the United Nations effectively said it went again. It fell short, there it is, of our values as a society.
I mean, it's slightly ironic to hear the United Nations calling it that, given that the majority of countries that make up the United Nations do not have this kind of policy in place. But I do agree with the Archbishop that we shouldn't have a cap on the number of on the number of children, at which point, your third child you don't help with. What the Archbishop focuses on is the suggestion that this pushes children into immediate poverty in this country. That I don't actually think is the key thing here, because, again, as I just sort of suggested, one of the major factors that is hindering this country is economic growth. We are facing a demographic crisis in this country where we are not having enough children in general. If you really want to know what poverty will look like, well, you just wait and see what happens in 20 or 30 years' time when there is a population collapse. We need to be incentivising as many people as we can to have children, if anything, just to keep the population numbers up.
Sure.
I do think it's an inhumane welfare policy. I see Keir Starmer once again. I mean, this is a man who just in 2020 pledged that he was going to scrap this, right? And once again, for his own political ambition, is decide to U-turn. You can't trust him on anything. And this is not the kind of thing you should U-turn on, because this is very, very important to majority of people. And the reality here is that in 2021, 2022, I believe the figure of the number of children in poverty was well over 4 million. We now know it's even more than that. And for me, that is the key thing here. We can't have more and more of our children being driven into poverty, and then families who can barely make ends meet falling into under that poverty line with no care and no focus. And I think Keir Starmer thinks, and this is a word he used, that he wants to come across as being responsible on public financing. This is not responsible at all. You don't stop helping, supporting, feeding, clothing, sheltering children simply because they've reached a certain number. That is not a responsible leader. That's not what a moral leader does. That's what a morally bankrupt leader does.
Very, very briefly, literally 5 seconds each. Do you think that Labour will heed the advice of the Archbishop of Canterbury?
I don't know. I can't trust Keir Starmer as far as I can throw him.
I don't think there's the money for it, sadly.
OK. All right. We're going to have to leave it there. We will, of course, touch on this subject. Again, coming up, among the stories that we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Telegraph, the headline, Russia and China manipulating UK voters with social media. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Shola Mos-Shogbamimu and Benedict Spence. OK, let's take a look now at the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. Quite an upsetting, well, potentially, upsetting and worrying story. Russia and China manipulating UK voters with social media war. And the accusation here that Russia and China are manipulating public opinion by promoting pro-Palestinian influencers online in an effort to stoke division. What do you make of this story specifically, Benedict, the way it's written?
I mean, I'm not surprised. I'd say, one of the things about the internet was it was supposed to usher in a great sort of information era about clarity, and, you wouldn't be able to hide anything. And if anything, propaganda just gets a lot more complex and a lot more mature. It's no surprise that Russia and China would be trying to do this sort of thing through the prism of this particularly polarizing conflict. In much the same way that, frankly, we have seen a lot sort of in the information war sort of broadcast out there throughout the invasion of Ukraine. Anybody who spent any sort of time online will know that actually there was an awful lot of propaganda about that. And I'm almost certain you will see a great deal of the sort of thing happening, a great big ratcheting up as we get closer to a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan. We need to remember that actually the internet is still something of a Wild West situation, which is why governments want to clamp down on it very hard. And it's why I find so very interesting that TikTok in this country and in the United States, although they want to put limits on it there, is largely very open and free. But in China, it is banned, and there is complete control by the government over what it is that their own populations can see, because they understand, actually, this medium is incredibly powerful.
And Shola, what's interesting here is that it's not necessarily pushing a particular side. It's more about stoking division, that seems to be the aim.
I think the story, the way that it's been written, is pushing a particular side. So Russia and China may be trying to manipulate UK voters, but it's the fact that the angle of the story is pushing it. It's kind of supporting the propaganda that supports, to my mind, it supports the Israel propaganda by saying that Russia and China, the enemies, are supporting pro-Palestinian accounts. That is where, for me, the kind of disinformation comes in and misinformation. The way this article is written will kind of grow distrust in information from accounts that are actually doing good work in raising awareness. That, for me, is a problem here. I'm not saying Russia and China are not trying to manipulate through social media. That's not it. I think here this article is saying, all those things you're hearing about,
one side, basically.
Absolutely trying to discredit the pro-Palestinian movement.
OK, let's move on to the Sunday Express. The headline there, big front page, companies told end this woke madness. Cabinet Minister, and that's Kemi Badenoch, tears into bosses over diversity drive. She's saying they have to get back to delivering great goods and services. Shola, I'm going to come to you.
Oh, no. I need Benedict to say this.
Okay, all right, then, Benedict.
Well, no, I suppose... look, Kemi Badenoch would like to be the leader of the Conservative Party. We all know that. She thinks that talking about woke, everything's woke, goes down very well with her audience. And she probably actually just has a sort of a flip book or maybe a darts board with topics on it where she throws the dart and goes, what is going to be woke today? Today it's going to be, I don't know, it's going to be social media, it's going to be private companies, it's going to be sport, it's going to be something. That's woke and we've got to have less of it.
Yep.
And that goes down very well. I mean, look, the Conservatives are also supposed to be, I thought, about the free market. They were supposed to be about ideas and actually people being able to decide what they want. Yeah. I'm not really sure it is the position of a politician to come along and say, you need to stop doing this. I think if this is companies pushing certain ethical lines, consumers will decide if they like that or not, okay. And companies will find out that way whether or not these things are popular. So,
Shola? He summed it up really well, but I would say that Kemi Badenoch truly understands her base. And I would say her base are the politically illiterate base. They feed off what I call, bigoted slogans and without applying any thought process to, keywords and phrases and rhetoric. And he's right. She probably, because she's power hungry, is looking at, what work can I throw in now just to show all these people, this demographic that I want to win over or I want to maintain. I wanted to know that I am anti-woke. Feeding the ignorance on what woke is meant to be. She is not...
Which is hard to define anyway.
No, it's not hard to define. Okay, black people already told you what woke is. And woke simply means being woke, i.e. you're awake to racial injustice. It's not difficult, it's not complex. I just said it in English, not in Latin or Swahili, so I can't understand why people find it difficult to comprehend. But what Kemi Badenoch does as the black face of the Conservative Party's racist, bigoted policies is to try and hone in on the very division and lack of unity. She claims that diversity is meant to be, because that's nonsense. The whole point of having diversity, inclusion, and equity is because for centuries, there was no equality, there was no equity, and nothing was diverse. Everything was centered on, white male. It was centered on whiteness, or, it did not make room for people from other, different gender, like women, did not make room for black or brown people, did not make room for other people, including LGBTQIA.
Shola, we're just going to have to end it there. Let me bring up the mirror very quickly. We're going to talk about the story, the big fight, fury between Usyk, but I'll tell you what, I'm pretty sure we're going to cover this story very, very soon. So that is it for now.